Hey everybody, my name is Alex, and in this video I am picking up where I left off in a previous article where we installed Docker and Portainer. Docker is going to be the service we use to create containers, and Portainer is a graphical user interface for Docker. You could just use the command line interface for Docker. I prefer Portainer, and this is the setup that we have right now where we have this local environment on Portainer installed and set up on our host, and I'm actually on my laptop and I will be SSHing into my host, so my browser is on my laptop and I'm just connecting through my host's IP address. All that's covered in the previous video, but just keep that in mind. If you have like Ubuntu desktop, you could just use the browser on your local host. For me, I'm doing this over the network. So in this video, we're going to set up some monitoring for our Docker services, and there's 4 things we're going to set up: Prometheus, Grafana, Node Exporter, and cAdvisor. Prometheus is sort of a middleman between your host and Grafana is where we're actually going to build out the dashboards using the metrics that we get from Prometheus as a data source. And then the metrics from Node Exporter and cAdvisor will run through Prometheus and make it available in Grafana. So I have 3 articles here because it's actually quite a bit to type out, even though we can finish this in a video pretty quick. But I'll cover all 3 articles and I'll link them in the description in this video. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is install Prometheus. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a directory in etc called Prometheus, and this is where we're going to put our Prometheus YAML file. So if I go into our terminal here, and I'm just going to leave the terminal up, and I'll be copying commands from the article, so just keep that in mind. But the first thing we did was make that directory etc Prometheus, and then we're going to do sudo nano. So we're going to open up nano and we're going to create this Prometheus YAML file. And then I'm literally just copying in the config that I have in the article. And there's a few things we're doing here. We're setting a scrape interval of 15 seconds. So the metrics are going to be scraped every 15 seconds from the jobs. We set up a job here called Prometheus. And we set up a target which has an IP address and a port. The IP address listed here is something that we are going to assign inside Docker. So you don't need to put your own IP address in here. We're going to create a network. In fact, you already would have a network created called SpaceNet if you watched the previous video. So if you haven't done that, definitely watch that first video to get to the point where we are now. But we are going to assign this statically. So you shouldn't need to change this unless you know specifically what you're doing. You want to use your own IP ranges, things like that. So for the most part, leave this as is. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually install the Docker container for Prometheus. So we'll do Control X, Y, and Enter to save this. And then we will switch over to Chrome again. And we're going to go into Portainer. On the left-hand side, once you click your environment, you'll see stacks, and then we'll click add stack, and we need to name this stack, so I'm going to do space stack. You can put whatever you want, and then we're going to go to this doc here, and we're just going to copy and then paste, and we'll go over this pretty quick. This is basically, we're using the version 3 styling of, this is actually a Docker Compose file, but they call it a stack. We're using the version 3 syntax. There's changes between each version. We're using version 3. We're going to set up a service called Prometheus, and we're going to be using an image, and this is the container image that we're building this container with, is the Prometheus latest one. And you can get these from Docker Hub. You can do a search and find the different images that you want. This is the official Prometheus one, so we'll be using that. We're actually just going to name this Prometheus so that it shows up in our containers. When we go to this later, it'll show up as named Prometheus. When we execute and run this Docker image, we're going to be adding this flag for the config file, and that's the config file we just made. We're going to be mounting this to our container, and we'll see that in the volumes down here. We're going to be running this as a root user, and then there's two volumes. I mentioned before we have this bind mount, which is basically binding a file system file to a mount point inside of our container. So we're just mounting this Prometheus YAML file inside our container at basically the same file path as it is on our host. And we're setting this as read only because it's just reading the config. We're also actually using a Docker volume here. So we're going to be creating a Docker volume called Prometheus data, and we're going to mount it inside the container to /Prometheus. We're going to be using port 9090, so this will be forwarded from our host to our container on 9090. So when we actually navigate to the GUI in the browser for Prometheus, we'll be doing it on 9090. We're going to use a network called SpaceNet, which we've set up. I guess this wasn't set up previously. So I mentioned before that you would have SpaceNet already set up. It looks like we didn't actually set that up in the last video, I don't think. But either way, we're setting it up now. We're going to use this network called SpaceNet, and we're assigning it that static IP address that we saw in the Prometheus YAML file. This part just creates that Prometheus data volume that we reference up here. And here's where we actually create the network called SpaceNet. You could put anything here other than SpaceNet if you want. I just named mine SpaceNet. We're going to be using Bridge Network, and it's just going to use the default driver, subnet, gateway. You can leave all of these things as is if you don't want to mess around or use your own custom settings. So that's it for this file. I think at this point we're just going to do, deploy stack. And assuming everything goes well, when we click deploy stack, it's going to be downloading the Prometheus image and deploying it as a container. So we'll go into the containers, and we can see now Prometheus is running. So Prometheus is up, and we should actually be able to go to, and I think it said port 9090. Perfect. Okay, so Prometheus is up. So what I did is grab the IP address of my host, and then I went to port 9090 like we specified in the stack file. So we had 9090 here. That's why we're using it here. And now Prometheus is running. And you can see any metrics that are hooked up to Prometheus by going to status and then targets. And we can see Prometheus, that job that we put in our config, is actually running. The state is up. So you should see a green state up. You should see Prometheus listed here. So we don't actually have any metrics yet. We've basically just set up the pipeline that would publish metrics from your host to Prometheus. If I remember correctly, yes, the next thing we're going to do is actually hook up that data source to Grafana. So I'm not going to cover the installation of Grafana. If you look at the website, it's literally, you can just go to this download. If you're on Linux, you just run these commands. If you're on Windows, you just download the installer, get it going. When you first log in, the username and password will both be admin. That kind of threw me through a loop when I initially did it. I actually started doing like the cloud Grafana setup, but it had been my first time using it, so I wasn't too sure what I was supposed to do. But you should be using the local version, and you should be able to just log in with admin. I actually created an account, and I didn't need to. Alright, so we can now, with Grafana installed, and I'll just bring up my Grafana here, we can add a new data source. So you should pause the video, install Grafana, or you can continue watching, and then when you're done watching it, you can go do these steps and follow along. But we're going to be setting up Prometheus as a data source inside Grafana. So we're going to open up the left-hand side here, the little hamburger icon, go to connections, because we're going to be adding a connection. And on the add new connection, you'll search for Prometheus. And then we're going to add a new data source. I'm going to do Prometheus space, because I have a lot of data sources right now for other hosts that are running Docker, so I don't want to get this confused. And I'm going to put demo, just so I know for sure. Now the URL, you need to put in the Prometheus server URL. It's going to be the exact same URL, including the port, that you use to get to the Prometheus web interface. Just paste that in there, and then you can just do save and test, and you can see successfully queried the Prometheus API. So our data source is now set up, and we did all this, we did this. So that's it for this article. Let's move on to the next one here. Okay, so in this one, we're going to be, let's see, we're going to install Node Exporter, which is metrics for our host, will be published. And this is going to be a service. It's not actually a Docker image like Prometheus. It's going to be a service that we run on our host. And it's still going to publish metrics to Prometheus, but instead of it being a container, it's going to be a service on our host. And then we're going to install cAdvisor, and this will be a Docker container, so it'll be a little bit easier to install. So let's get started on this because it's actually pretty easy. As always, there's some official documentation here on setting up Node Exporter. So if you want to follow the official instructions for an installation, you can do that. I've put them here. At the very least, you should get the latest version of Node Exporter for this wget. So you can replace this with the latest version. So actually, if we, I'm not sure where they're going to have the latest version. Oh yeah, here we go. Download the latest release. It looks like for Node, you got to make sure you scroll down to Node Exporter. Node Exporter, the latest release is 1.6.1, which was June 17th. So I still have the latest version in here. So I'm just going to copy this, and let's go back. Again, I'm just going to be showing the commands that I copy, but I'm just getting them from the article. We're going to extract this file that we just downloaded. There's 3 files that get extracted. We only need this one, this Node Exporter one. And we're actually going to copy that. So we're sudo cp for copy that Node Exporter file into user local bin. Then we will create a user that is specifically for running this service. So this user, we're going to do user add to create a user. No create home because this isn't a real user. This is a service user. And for shell, we're going to do bin/false because we don't want them to have access to the shell. And we're going to call this user Node Exporter. And then we're going to change the ownership of that Node Exporter file that we put in user local bin to that user that we just created. And then we're just going to do a little bit of cleanup here. We're going to remove that Node Exporter tar file that we downloaded. And now if I do ls, we can see there's no downloaded files anymore. I just like to keep my system clean. And then we will create the actual service. So what we're doing is sudo nano. So we're opening up a text editor, and we're creating this file nodeexporter.service, and this would be in the etc systemd system folder. And that's where we're going to put our services. Just like before, you can just copy and paste in the service stuff, and this is actually, it's pretty straightforward to create a service, which is cool. This is one of the huge benefits of Linux. I'm sure you could do this in Windows, but it's so simple in Linux. We're just putting in a description called Node Exporter. We want the network to be online, and it's going to run after the network's online. The user that's going to be running this service is Node Exporter. The group is Node Exporter. It's just a simple service, and it's running this file that we put in our user local bin called Node Exporter. So we'll do Control-X, Y, Enter to save those changes. And then we're going to reload our systemctl daemon with sudo systemctl daemon-reload. And at this point, we can start our Node Exporter service. So we'll do sudo systemctl. You always need to do sudo and then start Node Exporter. Now if we check the status, which we can just do the same command, but instead of start, we can do status, we can see that it is running, but there's this disabled under loaded. And that means that each time you reboot your computer, you will actually need to start that service again. So instead, we're going to, instead of disabled, it's going to be enabled. And we can do that pretty easy with just sudo systemctl enable node exporter. Now if we do status again, we can see it is enabled instead of disabled. So when you reboot your computer, this service will start automatically. Now we're going to edit our Prometheus YAML file again, because now we need to add node exporter to it. So let's open up our Prometheus config, and we will paste in a new job called node exporter. And this one, you might have noticed the IP address is a little bit different. And because we are running node exporter as a service on our host, it's not actually on the Docker network. So, and I'll show you this 172.17.0.1. If I bring up Chrome and we go to Portainer and we go to networks, we can see the bridge for the system is the gateway, sorry, is 172.17.0.1. And if we go back to here, that's what we're using as our IP address. And what this does is allow for a container on your Docker service to talk to a service that's on your host. So anytime the Docker needs to get out to the host, it's going to be using this 172.17.0.1. Anytime we're like working inside the container, we can just use the IP address that we assigned it. All right, Control X, Y, Enter. And now let's bring back Chrome. And because we updated the Prometheus YAML file, we need to restart our Prometheus container. So we'll open up Docker, we'll go to Containers, click the checkbox for Prometheus. Don't do Portainer. In fact, you shouldn't be able to click Portainer. Do Prometheus, then restart. And it's going to take a second, but if we go back to Prometheus and we click refresh, you can see right now neither of the state is up. That's because it takes a second to start. But we see we now have a node exporter entry here, which is pretty cool. So let's give it another refresh. There we go. Both are up. Perfect. So we have node exporter installed. It is publishing metrics to Prometheus as I talk right now. Of course, we don't have any dashboards set up in Grafana yet, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. We want to first install cAdvisor, which is our next monitoring service. So let's go to the instructions. We did all of this, and now we're doing cAdvisor. So as usual, I put the official documentation for cAdvisor in here, and you can click it and go and get all the information that you want about cAdvisor, but I'll put the installation instructions in here already. So the first step we need to do is add this depends on. So we're adding a Prometheus, adding to the Prometheus stack service here. So if we open up our stack, we'll go to stacks on the left hand side in Portainer, click space stack, and then we're going to click the editor up here. And then right at the end of the Prometheus service here, we're going to just hit enter. I bring it all the way back to the left-hand side and then paste this in here. These spaces are important in these YAML files, like what we are creating here. So make sure that when you're pasting these in, the spaces are set up correctly. You don't want this over, and then this would be under networks, and then it would not work. So just make sure. And these are 2 spaces each. So 2 spaces brings out that, 4 spaces, 6 spaces. So just make sure everything is spaced out correctly. And this depends on cAdvisor. So we haven't set up the cAdvisor service yet. We're about to do that. But what this is saying is don't load until cAdvisor is already set up. And let's get back here. And now we can paste in our cAdvisor service. We'll go back to Portainer, and right under Prometheus, we can give it a little space here, go all the way to the left-hand side with the cursor, and paste it in. Just like the Prometheus one, we're using the official image, the latest version. We're calling it cAdvisor. We're using port 8080. We have 4, these are all bind mounts, so we're not actually creating a Docker volume for cAdvisor. These are just going to be bind mounts.
And then we're using the same network as we did for Prometheus, SpaceNet, and we're assigning it this IP address of 172.180.101. And then we can just update the stack here. And this is going to start cAdvisor. And you don't need to re-pull the image and redeploy. You can just click Update. And since we are now adding cAdvisor, we need to, just like Node Exporter, add it to our Prometheus YAML file. So let me close out of Chrome here. And we will open up Prometheus. We already have the command that we just ran, so we're just going to press the up key to get to it again. And now we're going to add another job all the way at the bottom here. And it's going to be cAdvisor. And notice I have the IP address, the format a little bit different. It's not in these brackets. It's basically the same thing. So you could do it either style. I don't know why it's just like this here. I could change it, but it's perfectly fine. I'll leave it just to show you. And then this IP address is the one that we set up in our Docker stack on Portainer. So we're assigning that one. And we can just do Control X, Y, Enter. And now, just like any time we modify the Prometheus YAML file, we need to go into Portainer. We need to go to Prometheus. Actually, just go to all the containers here. We'll go to Prometheus, and we can see cAdvisor is running. It's healthy. And then we're just going to restart Prometheus. And again, we can go to Prometheus. We can refresh this. And it really hasn't even started yet. Let me give it. There we go. Okay, so now we've got cAdvisor in here. Node Exporter, Prometheus. They're all on known because it's too soon. It's still starting. Should be good now. There we go. So we successfully have a connection to cAdvisor, Node Exporter, and Prometheus. And that's it. We're going to move to the third article here. And this will be the final one. We're setting up dashboards now. So this should be pretty cool because you'll actually see visually what's going on. So yeah, let's jump right into our Grafana and let's set up these dashboards. So the last thing we did was set up our data source. Remember, your data source is whatever you called it here. Go to the hamburger icon again, dashboards. I can actually delete all of these. These were for when I was actually, I'm going to leave that one. These were from the last demo I did. All right, so what you're going to do is click this new, then click import. And luckily, typically you would have to create these dashboards, but luckily someone's already created dashboards for Node Exporter and cAdvisor. So if we look at our article here, we clicked new, we clicked import. Now you're going to paste in this 1860 for the import via Grafana. And then just click load. Now, for me, you can rename this if you want to. I just leave it as Node Exporter. I'm putting it just in the general folder. Because I already have a Node Exporter running, I need to set up a unique name. So I'm going to change the UID. You shouldn't have to do this. I'm just going to put test after it. And then for Prometheus, you have to select the correct Prometheus data source. I know it's that space demo. And then I'm going to click import. And as you can see, I actually will need to reboot my computer for the CPU to show up, but everything else is showing up. We've got the root file system size, we've got the RAM, swap, disk usage. There's so much stuff here. If you go down to like storage disks, you can see information about the reading and writing of the disk. Anything you could possibly want is here. So we have Node Exporter installed. Perfect. I actually like to do for the time frame just the last like 1 hour. If you need to go back further, you can always change this. And then I always do automatic refresh, but I do 1 minute. And then you can just click save and save. And now every time you come back to this, it'll be set to 1 hour and auto refresh every 1 minute. Cool. So one dashboard down. Let's set up the cAdvisor dashboard. We'll do new again, import. Under editing, we can see it is 14.282. Load. Just like before, I'm going to change my UID. You shouldn't have to. And then I'm going to set up the same data source, Prometheus space demo, and I'll leave it as cAdvisor exporter and click import. Awesome. So just like before, let's change this to 1 hour and let's do auto refresh to 1 minute. We'll click save, save. Now, there's a problem here. The memory usage and memory cached are just flatlining. There's no data. And that, I don't know why, but this dashboard maybe is outdated. We can fix that. So in the article here, there's these commands. This is sum command. We're going to just copy this, go back to our Grafana dashboard. For memory usage, we're going to click the 3 dots in the top right, click edit, and then where this command is down here, we're just going to paste in the new one, and then click run queries. And you can see we're already getting information. And then we'll do save, save, and then apply. And now we can see we're getting data. We need to do the same thing for memory cached, but they're 2 different commands. So scroll down a little bit further, and you'll see the second command here. Now open up Grafana again, top right, these 3 dots, edit, paste in the command, click run queries, save, save, apply. And just click one day I will get a new headset. If this doesn't receive any like sound going to the headset, it just turns off after like 15 minutes because it thinks that I'm not using it, but I'm actually speaking into it right now. So do not buy the, what brand is this? I don't even know what brand it is, but don't buy it, whatever it is. It's a SteelSeries headset. Don't get SteelSeries. Trash. All right. So we've already saved it. We've already applied it, and we're good to go. So we can see we're getting metrics for both of these right now. Perfect. That is too easy. And if we go back to our article here, that's really it. We've got everything going in our Grafana dashboard. We are now monitoring everything that's going on here. And you can switch back and forth. If you just go back to dashboards, you can see under general, you should have cAdvisor and node exporter, and we can click back and forth between them. And this didn't actually save, which is weird. Oh, you know what? All right. One quick thing. I'm glad I'm showing this. If you go to last hour and then you set this to auto 1 minute, click save, you actually have to save current time range as the default dashboard. I actually usually just click both of these and click save. Now if we go back and go in, it's actually saved correctly. I always forget that the first time. Oh, actually my CPU showed up. So it looks like maybe it just takes a second for the cores to show up here. And you can modify this, like this is all modifiable in the settings. You go down to like the JSON model and you can switch things around, but you need a little bit of knowledge of how to build these dashboards for everything to work. So that's it. At this point, you are fully set up. You've got your Docker service set up. We've deployed multiple containers with Portainer. We have cAdvisor for our container metrics. We have node exporter, which is running as a service on our host. And that's all pushing to Prometheus, where we have all of these different metrics getting published. Then inside Grafana, we have our data source. If we go down here, we have this data source, which is getting the data and then pushing it to our dashboards. So that's really it. Same thing with this one. Dang it. All right. Save, 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 save. All right, cool. So you're good to go. There's a lot you can do now that you have this set up. I'm going to be doing some videos on Space Mesh and how to run a Poet server. This was kind of like a prerequisite for that, so I wanted to finish up these videos. So if you're interested in running a Poet server or other Space Mesh things, it's a crypto. I know this is kind of like a generic Linux video, but this is building up to other videos. I wanted to have this as a sort of a baseline for everybody to get on the same page as far as Docker and monitoring goes. So with that being said, I'm going to end this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.